are the Shloshes Midos, the recitation thereof in the synagogue, is that considered a davar shebekedushah? Yeah, man. What are the opinions? Someone tell me. No, no one wants to offer something.
One saying yes, one saying no.
Yeah, it's probably machlokes. Oh, good. Okay, there are Mefarshim who say, and poskim who say explicitly, yes, it's davar shebekedushah. There are who say, no, it's not, and there are who imply that it's sort of, but not the way you understand it. Okay, so we'll see this from the very beginning. Okay, I'll tell you a personal story. One, they told me I have to stand for the recitation of the Shloshes Midos. Davar shebekedushah. Assuming it's a davar shebekedushah, we said this before. Why do I have to stand? There are many different davarim shebekedushah for which you do not have to stand. Just because it's davar shebekedushah doesn't mean you have to stand. For example, the Rambam would never say such thing. The requirement of davar shebekedushah is that it be done with a minyan. By the way, if I were just to stand up now in this room where there's no minyan, say Kaddish, is there anything wrong with that? Technically speaking, yes, you're not supposed to use God's scepter, so to speak. If I take out a Sefer Torah and start reading it, is there a problem with that? The answer is no. You're allowed to read from a Sefer Torah. I'm not accomplishing the rabbinic enactment to what? Read the Sefer Torah in public, right? Okay, there's certain things you can do, certain things you shouldn't do. And when I first heard that it's a davar shebekedushah, like this legitimate claim, my first reaction was like, eventually we'll see some of the poskim and scratch their head, like, no, it's not. It never was on the list. What list? So you're reading the list. Let's look at Hilchos Tefillah of the Rambam. This is the 8th chapter. It's the 4th halacha. The Rambam says, Chetzad hi tefillat hatzibur, or what you and I call chazaras hashatz, the repetition of the Shemon Esrei, a prayer on behalf of the tzibur. Why don't you just call chazaras hashatz? Why the tefillah of the tzibur? Well, because sometimes the Rambam allows for this, and there's still congregations that do this. There is no silent Shemon Esrei that precedes the tefillah tzibur, especially when on Rosh Hashanah. As we pointed out, the irony of Rabbi Soloveitchik's way of doing this. There's a shul here that they never have chazaras hashatz. Either it's Mariv, and it's just silent devotion everybody, and if it's any other prayer, the chazan davens out loud for everybody. Okay? So he says one man recites the prayer out loud, and everybody listens or heeds. And you don't do that unless you have at least 10 grown, free Jewish men. Okay. And the Shliach Tzibur, the one saying this on behalf of everybody, he is one of them. So you just need 9 people listening. And he continues the halacha. And the Rambam then adds, V'chein ein romin kedushah v'lo korim b'Torah. Also, we don't say kedushah. Apparently, what's kedushah? Isn't that part of the Shemona Esrei? In this case, the Rambam means Kaddish, what you and I call Kaddish. Why didn't Rambam call Kaddish Kaddish? Kaddish is just the Aramaic word for Kadosh. Okay, it's not a fitting thing. Kedushah in this case means the Kaddish, which is, by the way, we're going to mention Rav Amram Gaon a few times tonight. Here's Seder Rav Amram Gaon, the Goldschmidt edition, the critical edition put out by Mosrad Rav Kook. It's great. Go get yourself a copy. If not, sit in the base Medrash, which has a copy. So the Rav Amram Gaon, like many others, refers to his verb for reciting the act of reciting the Kaddish is mekadesh, the same verb used for what you and I recite kiddush on, let's say, the Sabbath and holidays. That's what the Rambam says. No Kaddish without a minyan. No reading the Torah by reciting the brachas. You can take out a Sefer Torah and read it out loud all you want, but you cannot say those blessings before and after the reading unless you have a quorum. Same thing, maftirim banavi. You can take out a Isaiah and start reading out loud here, but you cannot recite the blessings before and after unless you have your 10 men. That's why I color-coded everything here. What's the question? Yeah. He says it's what? Oh yeah, Kaddish. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I put that in blue.
Maybe here is
yeah, maybe here it's talking about the Kaddish of Shemon Esrei, the Kedusha of Shemon Esrei. No, it's the one in I forgot it. It's Seder Olam. Seder Ayom. It's when you say Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. So I got it wrong. Okay, so let's scratch that. That's why I put in red. Kaddish is in blue over here. Do you all see this over here? Dafka put in blue, so I wouldn't make that mistake twice. Okay. Vein omrim Kaddish el ba'asara. Here the Kedusha means Kedusha de Sidra. Kedusha de Sidra at Shachris is 3 times. He's not talking about the Kedusha de Sidra of Shemon Esrei, though, because you already need a minyan for Chazar Sach. He's talking about the one in Kriyat Shema which is separate from the brachos. You and I could say the brachos, and you could discharge my obligation to say the brachos, right? But also we insert kedusha. The kedusha is something that's inserted there, and also seder hayom, which is v'alatzion. Very good. So let's clarify that. And good. Also, you shouldn't have kriyas shema v'kol shomim v'onim acharav ela basara. This whole thing with someone discharging everybody's obligation, what's called porisal kriyas shema, which he says here in green. That's also with a minyan. V'enorim kadish ela basara. Some say this includes barchu, because the Rambam says, where's barchu? Well, barchu is either, as we said before, barchu is something that always precedes what? One person saying brachos and then kriyas shema for everybody, and then brachos, or one person saying brachos, reading the Torah, and then brachos for everybody. So that's what barchu precedes. So barchu is included somewhere here. And then he says, Ve'ena kohen nosim kapehem. So too, you don't have the kohanim also raise their hands and bless people unless you have asara. And he mentions over here, here's the source for it. And notice that, but it doesn't say, and no reciting the shloshes remidos, unless you have, you could supplicate before God. Technically speaking, if you need to fall on your face before God, Moshe Rabbeinu, you need to fall on your face before God and pray whatever needs to be prayed. So you can technically do that, especially in the temple. But it doesn't say here, but if you have the 13 midos, those should only be said with a minyan. In Megillah, in the Mishnah over here, the introduction to the Sugya, the Mishnah mentions a few examples that the Rambam brings, and then a few examples that the Rambam didn't bring because these aren't a place for them. He mentions Porsin al Shema, and Ovrim Lifnei Teva, that's Tfilat Tzibur. Vein Nosin Mes Kapem, that's the Birkat Kohanim, I put that in black. No reading the Torah, Maftirim Banavi. What's missing here? Kedushah is missing, and Kaddish. But also says you don't do Ma'amad Moshav. Vein Orim Birkat Avilim, V'tan Chume Avilim. This is something they do for Avilim. At funeral, Ma'amad and Moshav, and how you say certain blessings with the mourners around, and Birkat Chatanim, the Sheva Brachas, right? The two stages of a wedding, we do it all together at once. The kiddushin have entirely fundamentally different requirement. In order to do an act of proper kiddushin with a woman, what do you need? Your valuable object and 2 kosher witnesses. Okay, you need kosher witnesses to it. So you could do an act of kiddushin 4 people: the groom, the bride, 2 kosher witnesses, and the ring or the star, whatever it may be. That's it. For nisuin, you have chuppah. And what does that mean? Well, the Rambam says you don't actually need a chuppah. Chuppah means they go home together afterwards. You need a minyan, and you need to recite Shev Brachos and also present the ksuba. So when we have our normal weddings, it's all lumped together. We have the minyan and we have the witnesses. But nisuin needs a minyan. Okay? So that's here. And the Shev Brachos. And every time you recite the Shev Brachos afterwards, at parties for it, celebrate the wedding, you need a minyan. And also zimun, with mentioning God's name as part of the zimun. You need a minyan. And karko, that means the valuation of the land that the person is dedicating to the temple. So Rashi mentions over here, minyan haba leveit knesset. When you're talking about a minyan, they show up at the synagogue, right? So after after they read Shema together, Kaddish uvaruchu. Okay, he says Kaddish and Baruchu uvrach rishon should be kriyat Shema porsin, and he says porsin is a shon chatzi davar. Notice here the Rashi doesn't mention or make mention over here. He just explains what porsin al Shema is. I don't see the shloshes remidos, and you look in that sugya in Megillah, they also don't mention the shloshes remidos, right? So is it davar shebekedushah or not? So far, no. Yeah, so far, I wouldn't say probably. So here's what the Torah in the end of Hilchos Tainus has to say. He's talking about the Anenu. Yachid doesn't say Anenu in his prayer. Okay? I'm sorry, Yachid, he doesn't say a separate bracha for Anenu in his prayer. Instead, it's part of the Shmoya Tefillah bracha. Shliach Tzibur has a separate bracha of Anenu. Lo shna Yachid shekibel av tanit, lo shna Yachid am pelel matzibur b'tanit tzibur. Doesn't matter if it's Tainus Yachid or he's going to be with the Tzibur. The Chazan in Chazar Sashatz is going to have a separate bracha Aninu. He's still going to say Aninu in his Shmei Tefillah. They're Gaonim right. Shein Lomer El B'Mincha Shema Yuchazenu Bulmus Sheitz Tarich Lechov Nimsa Shakram B'Filato. This is the Ashkenazic practice. The Yachid only says Aninu when it's finally Mincha time. because now he knows that he's actually completed mostly the fast. Minhag Eretz Yisrael is not like this, as you know. Minhag Eretz Yisrael Sidurim have Aninu even at Mariv when the fast begins. Next, Vitov, and also some Sephardic Sidurim. Vitov, what? The Rambam, yeah. V'tov lomar b'mincha b'tachnim shachar tefila achar elokayim tzor b'won kol mim galibia adu lefenecha shebizman shemek the shayakayim. They used to offer korban and burn the fats on the altar, and now I've reduced my fat. You should accept my you should accept my fast. Okay, good prayer. Here's Rav Nosson. Kasav Rav Nosson. She'ein minhag liyachid amisana lomar yud gimel midos. Rav Nosson says that if you have a fast day, the assumption is the people say Yud Gimel Midos on fast days. Where is that mentioned? Rav Amram Gon actually says it. The way we have slichos, okay? He mentions Yud Gimel Midos is partially. It's mentioned there among other psukim. It doesn't say it as specifically like. By the way, Yud Gimel Midos has to be said with the minyan. He just mentioned slichos, and it's a very long rite. And there's two different versions based on two kisvei that the Professor Goldschmidt brings here. And by the way, it looks oddly similar to our slichos today. Okay? It is. Our slichos, whether Ashkenazic or Sephardic, have certain things that are very much in common, and there you could see them even in the times of the Gaonim. So they were saying Yud Gimel Midos, as in the Tzibur. Rav Nosson says that the minhag is that an individual who's having his own fast does not say Yud Gimel Midos. The Tur, the Baal Turim, Rabbeinu Yaakov, son of the Rosh, says, I don't understand what the chashash is. It's just like read the Torah. He could say other verses from the Torah, right? That's right. That's in Bamidbar, when Moshe Rabbeinu responded to the great sin of the spies, right? It's sort of like this, the 13 midos. When Chazal talked about davar shebekedushah, what were they talking about? Kaddish, Kedusha, and Baruch Hu, and things like that, like the Rambam has. So Rav Nosson is mentioning basically an opinion that holds that the 13 midos, the recitation thereof, is a davar shebekedushah, and the Tur himself is saying it's not a davar shebekedushah. Bam. So who holds that the shlosha three midos are not a davar shebekedushah? The Tur. Pretty big. That's a pretty big posek. Presumably, the Tur was born to his father when the Rosh was only 19, and the Rosh lived to be like 80 something. So the Tur and the Rosh had a very close Rebbe Talmud relationship. Okay? It wasn't like he was a Ben Zakuni, he was a Ben Neurim. So he knew basically everything his father said. He's the source. He basically took all the Rosh's psak and turned it into what became the basis of the Shulchan Aruch. And so he's saying this. I never heard that the Shlosh Esrei Midos are a davar shebekedushah. I don't know the Rush well enough, but I'm pretty sure I went looking. I never saw an indication in the Rush that the Shlosh Esrei Midos are davar shebekedushah, and I would thank anybody who has any indication to tell me what the Rif would hold about this. I didn't see in the Rif either. Okay, so the Rambam you don't find it explicit in the Rif. You don't find it so far. Certainly the Rush and the Tur don't. The Beis Yosef writes over here. Kasav Rav Nosson she'ein minhag liyachid amesana lomar yud gimel midos kachi das harashba. Okay, shekasa b'tshuva zelashono mistaber l'chol she'omra derech tefil v'akashos rachmim ein nemar b'yachid. Says if you say it the way it's supposed to be said, it shouldn't be said by an individual. Davar shebekedushah hein. How do you know it's davar shebekedushah? This is the source that the Vilna Gaon brings. When the Vilna Gaon on that siman in Shulchan Aruch has to address those who claim that the Shlosh Esrei Midos are davar shebekedushah, the Vilna Gaon brings this teaching brought by the Rashba. It's from Rosh Hashanah. Yud Zayin Amud Beis. What does it say? It's an Agadata. You open up your classic Gemaras here in Rosh Hashanah, you'll see that this is a Gemara that everybody knew about, but those marks are missing. Where it tells you, you could find this upgepaskid somewhere in the Rambam. It's not there. It says that God, so to speak, appeared to Moses wrapped with a talis like a shliach tzibur. Said, when Bnei Yisrael do the wrong thing, do this. This is the right way to play. Here's the magic words. Chas v'shalom. I'm saying chas v'shalom. I shouldn't say magic words. It means like this is the right formula. If he has to say the Yud Gimel Midos without a minyan, so he should just read it like he's reading the Torah. Why Yavor Hashem al Paneh? Why Yikra Adonai Adonai Rahum Hanun Ercha B'Rav Hasad Wemeth? Continue, just like he could do with the verses of Kedushah that aren't ritually said without a minyan, but technically speaking, I can read the book of Ezekiel and get to that part where the Kara Zel Zeh Wilmar here. Fine, that's what the Rashba says. V'afal Pisha Kasav Harav David Avudraham. Shira Rabbeinu Yonah Kasav Kedivra Rabbeinu Lo No Nahug Alma Hachi. The Avudraham says that Rabbeinu Yonah says, like Rabbeinu, like the tour. So there is a line of authorities who held like the tour that the 13 midos are not a davar shebekedushah. The Shulchan Aruch ultimately says that's not how we hold, and that's why Sephardim and everybody else takes it very seriously, because this way you'll find Shulchan Aruch, the 13 midos are davar shebekedushah. So what is the answer? What the Gra is bringing this as this source? If the source is as what it is, why didn't the Torah and everybody else hold that the 13 midos are a davar shebekedushah? Because when Moshe Rabbeinu heard this from God, one, it was God saying it. Two, Moshe Rabbeinu was alone. God dressed up like a shliach tzibur. Yes, perhaps the shliach tzibur saying it does have a certain metaphysical power. Like these are the words. You have to invoke God's midos. By the way, see in more Nevuchim what it means that God's midos harachamim work. It's not the way most people think, obviously. As a matter of fact, the way the Rambam describes things in more Nevuchim is not the way most people think about anything. Okay, it's usually a much more profound way of understanding it. Most people, like you see, I show people Rambams just how Nevuah works, and people are like, that must be kfira. I never heard that before. That's not what was taught in Beis Yaakov. So you have to watch out. But the Rambam says that really God's creation works according to laws that he set in this world, what we call laws of nature, but also actually part of the laws of the Torah. So what does it mean when God is being merciful or he's relenting? That's how we relate to it. That's how we perceive it. It makes it a lot more personal when you think about it. But either way, maybe that'll be another share for later. What does it mean, God has mercy? Okay, according to the Rambam. So the various answer is, according to all these poskim who don't hold that the Yod Gimel Midos are something that's davar shebekedushah, despite this agadata, they look at it and say, yes, it's just agadata, and it's referring to an instance where there was only one human around and not a minyan. Okay, so now let's answer the Rambam. I think, though, that in the Rambam, he takes a sort of middle approach. Okay? Because it is eminently clear from the times of the Gaonim that the Shloshes Midos was the thing to do, was that which should be invoked on fast days and times of trouble, right? And you know that minhag that they have, maybe you've done with the Sephardim on Yom Kippur. You know what they do in Slichos? They actually count how many times they say they recite the 13 midos. Do you ever see this before, this minhag? They count it. Here's how it goes. They want to get to 26 times, say the Yod Gimel Midos. 26 times. Why? What's 26? That's Gematria, the ineffable name. Shem Mefurish. So they have the same Slichos after the Shmona Esrei of every one of the tefillos of Yom Kippur. It's the same, Piyutim and other things of Inu Shabashamayim and Anenu Hashem Anenu, right? And they intersperse the 13 midos there at different points. In Mariv, they say the 13 midos 5 times, intersperse them 5 times in the Slichos. And at Shachris, another 5 times. And at Mincha and Musaf, it's 6 and 7. Leads us up to how many? 10 plus another 6 and 7 is 23, and 3 at Ne'ilah for a total of 26. Why these numbers? There's something behind it. Now, this is the type of minhag. Say the 13 midos 26 times over over Yom Kippur, and break it up this way: 5, 5, 7, 6, or 6, 7. I forget. I think it's 6, 7, 5, 5, 6, 7, 3. Right? Why is that? That's the type of thing that you find where Lurianic Kabbalah. Right? Ironically, that's what's also mentioned by who? The Rosh, the Tur. Okay, the Tur makes mention of this minhag. So this is already typical Kabbalah, and even Ashkenazic authorities knew about this. That when you say your slichos, have the 13 midos there 26 times, and here's how to break it up. So that's what they were saying. So why did they treat it like a davar shebekedushah? What was the Rambam's belief? The Rambam has in Hilchos Tefillah later, like the Gemara. What does the Gemara say? That there are certain fast days when you have to have a Torah reading, which invokes the 13 midos. It says in Ilchos Tshuva, "B'tishava b'shachris korin kitu libanim u'avtirna sof asifim. U'mincha korin vayechal kishar yemei hataniot. Vayechal Moshe is where you find the Shloshis Midos. And Mincha, on the fast day of Tisha B'Av, you read this. Uvishar Taniot, Shanu Mitanin, Alma She'ira Lavotenu, Kurim Shachar Rincha Harishon, Kore Vaychal Moshe Arba Psukim, the Kore Shani Vashlishi, Mipsol Lecha, Ad Asher Anio Seimach. There's a vav here. There shouldn't be a vav there, but Machon Mamre puts in those vavs where it's a komatz katan. Okay, so basically the Rambam's saying on fast days you have to make sure to read what the part of the Torah reading as the 13 midos. The Rambam doesn't have it. Maybe I'm mistaken. Unlike Rav Amram Gon and let's say the Tur who mention where the 13 midos come in the liturgy. Here's when you say them. The Rambam, I couldn't find it. Where does the Rambam invoke the 13 midos? Ever. In all his orders of prayer, and he doesn't mention slichos, by the way. He mentions there are slichos that people say on Aser Simichuva. And he also mentions Yom Kippur, there's a lot of slichos and tachanunim. Does he give us examples in his books? No, he assumes we have a Seder Rav Rambam going or Machzor Vitri or whatever it might be. The Rambam didn't think it was important enough to include in his Seder Tfilos, even though he has other forms of tachanunim, like weekday tachanunim, and he has the viduyim for Yom Kippur, which are slightly different than we have in the Gonim. The Rambam actually abbreviated the various tachanun that we have in earlier sources. So the Rambam never mentions ever in his Hilchos Tefillah, here's when you say the 13 midos or his order of prayer. But where does he does mention them? Over here in the Torah reading. And the Torah reading is a davar shebekedushah. This is similar to how the Rambam says something that we could find in later poskim more explicit. What is that? The Rambam says, for example, what we said with Parsha Zachor. You have a mitzvah to enunciate, say it, remember Amalek. This is a chira b'feh, right? And how do you do that? Through Torah reading. And then the Rambam mentions that you're supposed to read Parsha Zachor where or when? Before Purim. So the implication is they turned off the air conditioner without asking me. So it's just like, here, let's suffocate you. We could open up the window on the other side. That'll help us also. So what happens? It comes out like the Vilna Gaon eventually puts it all together. It's not that the Torah reading of Zachor is mandated by the Torah. It's not like one time a year read the Torah before Purim. That's not what it means. That's a mitzvah d'oraisa. Through the Torah reading of Zachor that the sages said should be before Purim, we fulfill the mitzvah of remembering Amalek. Right? So too, through the Torah reading that the sages instituted on fast days, we accomplish the reading of the Shlosha Srei Midos. That's why this is the reading of on the fast days, because this is where the Shlosha Srei Midos are. So for the Rambam, the main reading of the Shlosha Srei Midos doesn't need to be said, oh, it's a davar shebekedushah, because it's already part of the Torah reading. It's the Torah reading for this particular day. That's all. And the Rambam was asked a question about how to do, if this is legitimate. I know Rav Kapach didn't trust every single tshuva we have from the Rambam. See that sugya about finding tefillin on Shabbos, and you have to bring the tefillin back into town. So without carrying the tefillin, you have to wear the tefillin. Rav Kapach says, based on the Vilna Gaon, that he suspects that a tshuva that backs up one of the gearses we have in the Rambam is not reliable. And by not reliable, he means it's a forgery. Okay? But there's a lot of tshuvas or letters from the Rambam we have that are pretty authoritative, like the Rambam's description of going to the Temple Mount and Igeris Teman and the letter to the Ger, right? Everybody knows those are real Rambam writings, but some of them are more questionable. This is, I think, one of the less controversial ones. And the Rambam was asked concerning the various minhagim about recitation of the Shlosha Srei Midos. You familiar with this tshuva? Here it is. What? Oh, so you read it. Okay, so sorry if maybe you read it. Maybe you read it because I sent it out 2 days ago. No, you already read it. Good. If you already read it, good. You should know the Rambam backwards and forwards, just like the Mishnah. Okay. So they asked him, Rabbi, please teach us. In Alexandria, I've seen Gear says, no, it's supposed to be Alexandria. Okay, fine. It seems that it's supposed to be that way. They're reading Parshas Kisisa. They get the Shloshes Midot Paras. Shotek ad shikru akal b'kol gadol. Suddenly, the one who's actually reading the Torah is quiet. Everybody else says the Shloshes Midos out loud. Where is that the minhag? On fast days, that's what Ashkenazim do. And they start where do the people say it? Not very Hashem. They don't say Hashem Hashem. They say Hashem Kel Rachum V'Chanun. Tahainu Hashem Kel Rachum V'Chanun and so forth. Some say that actually because both names are part of the 13 Midos. By the way, Steinsaltz has a nice chart there on Rosh Hashanah Yud Zayin. I have a copy over here if anybody wants to see it. I'll put it on the screen in a second. Where is it? Okay, over here. Let's stop the share. This is a wonderful thing that Steinsaltz made available for everybody. All the different shitas. What are the 13 midos? So you see here, some include both names of the Lord. Some include just the first name of the Lord. And some say it starts with the word kale. And others say it starts with rachum. See? And also, what's the last midah? Most of our liturgy assumes that the 13th midah is vinakeh, right? Like all these opinions over here. But some say it goes well beyond vinakeh. So what do you know? I think he only brought here 9 different opinions. There are more. Had a number of them. So that's thank you, Steinsaltz, for our Rebbe, even if we're not necessarily agreeing on everything hashkafically. Okay, so the question is, the questioner assumes that you're supposed to recite the 13 midos, so you should make sure you get all 13, right? And he also says that one day Rav Pinchas introduced them to this idea that he says, well, you're not supposed to just say one, you're supposed to say 2. And they continue with this the question here. So they asked the Rambam, what should we do here? Okay, what's the right way to do this? Okay. So the Rambam responded, this is you know what, we should actually, I give this as an answer to most things. That people ask me a question like, how many times a day should I say Kaddish for my deceased father? That's a question. So what's the answer I give them? None of this was mentioned in the Talmud. I can't give you a Talmudic halachic answer for something that's non-Talmudic. This is a minhag that was established by the Chazanim, the guys who read the Torah. I know nothing about this. Some say it out loud, some people don't. What does it have to do with me? Rambam says, if it has nothing to do with the Talmud, and you're not doing an Avera, by the way, so what does it matter? No answer. And then the Rambam has here, what his opinion is, what are the 13 midos? Where does it start? Which is not for today. Okay? So I mentioned it over here. The way we say the 13 midos is like we already find in Rav Amar Gaon among other Gaonim, and the minyan is also mentioned by Torah. That means how we count how many times to say it. So you see the Rambam here assume that they were saying the 13 midos as part of the Torah reading, but the minhag of how you go about saying it, whether you say it in Torah reading, the Kahila says it out loud, just the Chazan says it out loud, maybe you just recite them after as part of Tachanunim. None of it is Talmudic. The Talmud has nothing to say about how to say the 13 midos, and the Talmud doesn't tell us where they start. By the way, what's the best way? Therefore, I think the best way to say the 13 midos, like the Rambam says, read the 2 psukim in their entirety. Vayavor Hashem apanav vayikra, and continue v'nakei lo yanakeh pokei avon avot al banim al banim al shelishim v'al ribeim. That way, you cover all your bases, and also you haven't chopped up the pasuk in a way that perhaps is not legitimate. The way we say it v'nakei in the synagogue, that's not the siluk. That's just a pashta that goes into v'nakei lo yanakeh. According to the Tamim, it continues. So I think the Rambam basically said, I hold off as long as you're reading the Torah, and so this is a good introduction to what we see now. So according to the Rambam, what should slichos consist of? If you ask the Rambam, Rabbeinu, Rabbeinu, how should we be reciting slichos? So what does the Rambam say? I don't know. It's not in the Talmud. I just wrote, you wake up in a shmoris and you say it. Well, when should we say slichos? Well, I don't know. We wake up in a shmoris, but it's not in the Talmud. It's a post-Talmudic creation. It's like asking Rambam, how should we do akafas on Sukkos and Simchas Torah? He mentions that people start doing hakafas. You take your lulav and you march around the biba in the mikdash. Is that mentioned in the Talmud? That's why it's radically different. The Sephardic machzer, for example, is radically different from the Ashkenazic machzer hakafas and how you do it. Why? Both on Simchas Torah and during the holiday. Why? Because post-Talmudic. If it's post-Talmudic, I can't comment on it, and it's not governed by halacha and what's right. And many other things are like that.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.